Jody, you're muted.
Okay, let me start over. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Lemon Project's final Lemons Legacies Porch Talk for Spring 2021. Get to know the WJCC Coalition for Community Justice. My name is Jody Allen, and I am the Robert Francis Ings Director of the Lemon Project, A Journey of Reconciliation. Before I turn it over to our moderator for the evening, I want to read the William and Mary Land Acknowledgement Statement. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka, Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansman, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Potomac, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respect to their tribal members, past and present. It is now my pleasure to turn the panel over to our moderator, Professor of Law, Vivian Hamilton.
Thank you so much, Jody. And I'm really thrilled to be here with you all this evening. I'm Vivian Hamilton, and I'll be moderating our panel today. I want to introduce to you our panelists, and I'm just going to introduce them in the order in which they'll be speaking. So, and maybe panelists, if you can wave as I introduce you. So our first panelist is Professor Adam Gershowitz, who's a professor of law at William & Mary Law School, where he specializes in criminal procedure and criminal law. Next, joining us is Jessica Sapollio, who is a member of the WJCC Coalition for Community Justice. Herb Jones is also joining us. He's with the WJCC Coalition for Community Justice. He is a retired colonel from the U.S. Army and former treasurer of New Kent County. And our fourth panelist is Jeanette Weaver, who's joining us from Williamsburg Action. So thank you very much to our panelists for being here, and thanks to all of you for attending this evening. So I'm going to begin by asking Professor Gershowitz to give us a bit of an overview of civilian oversight boards, what the nature of his involvement has been so far. Is it academic? Have you studied them? What is their purpose? Why are we talking about them this evening?
Thanks, Professor Hamilton, and thanks for coming to participate in this, which I think is a wonderful event. I'll try to be brief so that you can spend more time hearing from the people who have done a lot more of the organizing. I've participated with the Coalition for Community Justice, but have not pulled the laboring oars, unlike some of the other folks that are here. So I'll be sort of brief. And when we think about this, there's a lot of attention that's come since last summer with the murder of George Floyd. But surely that is not the only reason that we're interested in this topic, and it does not date solely from that topic. And so the idea of police oversight boards, there's a variety of names for them. There's nothing magic about any of the particular names, whether you call it a civilian or a citizen oversight board. It may have slightly different connotations, but they're all basically getting at the same thing, which is the police department is an extremely powerful agency entity composed of individuals that are authorized to exercise the use of force, the use of deadly force, to stop you and me when they go down the street or when you're driving, which is an enormous amount of power. And if you think about the federal government, and the agencies, and no matter what your political perspective and what your favorite sort of agency might be in the federal government, whether it's the State Department or the EPA or the Department of Defense, all of those agencies have an inspector general that looks into what those very powerful agencies are doing. And this concept, when you boil it down, is really no different than that idea, which is we have entrusted law enforcement with an enormous amount of power. And the idea of an oversight board is simply to sort of check and make sure that power is being exercised permissibly in the best way possible. So it's not simply about whether the power is being exercised lawfully, but whether it's being exercised with good judgment, morally, ethically, et cetera, right? And so an oversight board does a variety of things. A lot of people pay a lot of attention because there's a lot of media coverage for shootings of unarmed individuals, particularly unarmed Black men in this country. But that's not all we're talking about or all we're focused on for this. And so an oversight board would look at cases of police shootings, but it also looks at cases of police brutality, of wrongful stops, wrongful arrests, wrongful searches. It would review police practices. So it would consider whether or not the police department has good policies for things or whether they don't. At the same time, an oversight board is not a controlling board, right? It's a complement to the police department. And so no oversight board that I'm familiar with in the United States gives the board the power exclusively to discipline the officers. And the theory for that is quite simple, which is even the best informed. So I'm a criminal law professor that studies criminal law and criminal justice. I'm not qualified to sort of oversee an entire police department because I don't have all of the training that they would have, right? And the same would go for any other citizen or civilian that's in existence that would be participating in such a board. And so the idea is for an independent entity to have a separate set of eyes, and for that separate set of eyes to make findings, to gather information, to be able to look at the cases of misconduct and the sort of practices and policies and give sunshine to those policies and those situations so that all the information is out in the public. And then the people who are in charge of the department, the police chiefs and the deputy chiefs who make determinations about whether or not to fire an officer or change a policy, so that they can do that from an informed standpoint. And so they can do it so we are able to sort of see they are doing it based on the following facts that actually exist in the department, as opposed to what a government agency would tell you if no one is looking, right? So the concept of an oversight board is a good idea. In my professional opinion, it's a good idea whether you have a department that is known to be engaging in flagrant misconduct or a department that's never seen a sort of very high profile case of misconduct, because we really have no idea on a day-to-day basis what goes on with all the power that's been delegated to a police department. And so the idea here is another set of eyes that will look and provide information, but really make it accessible to everyone in society, so that the police chiefs and the other folks are going to have to be transparent about why they've made their decisions in light of conflicting pieces of information. And so my view is that these are very good organizations. They make sense. And if you hear a police department say to you, well, we don't have problems here, we don't need one, I don't think that is the right answer. The reason these agencies or oversight boards are valuable is to prevent these sorts of problems and to sort of get at problems beneath the surface that exist that we don't presently see, but a lot of people may experience in their day-to-day lives. And so I think I'll stop there and turn it over to the folks that have done a lot more of the organizing of this.
All right, thanks, Professor Gershowitz. That was super helpful for those of us who are not sort of intimately familiar with with efforts around these boards. But our next panelist is someone who has been involved locally, and Jessica Sapollio with the WJCC Coalition for Community Justice is going to bring this down for us to the local level. So I'll turn it over to you, Jessica.
Thanks, Professor Hamilton, and thank you to the Lemon Project for having the coalition here tonight. We're very excited to share all of the efforts and things that we've been working on and hopefully get all of your support and engagement as well. But the coalition was formed last summer. We came out of actually Williamsburg Action's efforts. We met through some of the protests and rallies after the death of, or the murder of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And we came together as a group. We represent a number of community organizations, faith-based groups, as well as just concerned individuals who wanted to make sure that we could both do exactly what Professor Gershowitz said, prevent major tragedies, but also address issues that we know are going on with the criminal legal system here locally. So our coalition has a couple of different facets. Our number one goal is to work on setting up a civilian oversight board, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But we're looking at many aspects of the criminal legal system. We have a court watch program that was actually in effect before last summer that we've rolled into this, where we go into the courts every day of the week and we look at bond hearings and people's first appearance before a judge, trying to address racial and economic disparities that exist in our courtrooms. And we're also advocating for other programs like drug courts, which are diversionary programs, to really try to keep people out of prison and help them get the help that they truly need. You know, prison and jail is no place to rehabilitate folks. And we need to just stop caging people, stop mass incarceration. And we really believe that mass incarceration is just a modern day continuation of slavery. And, you know, slavery in America really started here in James City County. So we need to set the example for how we can change things. Like I said, our main goal right now is an establishment of a civilian oversight board for both the Williamsburg and James City County Police Departments. We've not had a major news-making tragedy, and we want to keep it that way. But as Professor Gershowitz also said, we know that there are underlying issues. The statistics show it. We know in Williamsburg and James City County, for instance, Black people make up about 13% of the population, but close to 42% of the arrest rates. Over the last decade, Black people have been arrested at rates between 3 and 5% times the rate of white people. So they're being arrested at so much higher rates. There's so much racial profiling going on in our local community. We know that we need more evidence-based policing. There is so much work and so many academic studies out there on what works in policing, and we need to help push our police forces to get there. And we really believe a civilian oversight board is the way to do it. It needs to be independent, not have anyone with law enforcement experience on the board. And like Professor Gershowitz said, well, how would we know what decisions to make? These board members would go through significant training before they're making these recommendations back to the police chief. But it's important that the members not be selected by the police, that they're selected by the community. It's important that they are, and therefore completely independent. They would report to Williamsburg City Council or the James City Board of Supervisors. Again, it's, thinking about the IRS would not have you audit yourself. So why are the police handling their own complaints? We do often hear, oh, there aren't problems in Williamsburg and James City County, but again, we don't hear about them. And often people don't complain to their oppressors. I know I personally would find it pretty scary to file a complaint against a police officer. So if we had that independent review board, we could make sure that there weren't problems and also review policies and practices to make sure that our police departments are using evidence-based policing and are accountable to our community and our taxpayers.
Okay, Ms. Jessica Sapollio, thank you so much for that. And I know that there'll be some follow-up questions about your efforts and where they stand. But before we get there, I want to introduce again Mr. Herb Jones, who is also a member of the WJCC Coalition, and who's had some personal experiences in Williamsburg and James City County as well. Herb?
Thank you, Dr. Hamilton, and thank everyone for being here this evening. For for every situation like George Floyd, there are thousands of interactions that could go bad with police officers. And what I'd like to do tonight is share some of my experiences. I'm a retired full-bird colonel. My parents raised 4 boys. I have a brother who has an engineering degree from Duke. I have another brother who has his master's degree, or his PhD in education from Virginia Tech. And my youngest brother is a social worker in Roanoke. Each one of us have been pulled over simply because of the color of our skin. Twice, I've had a gun pointed at my head by a police officer. It wasn't a James City County or Williamsburg police officer, but I had a gun pointed at my head nonetheless for no reason. I've had 3 cousins who have died in custody of police. For a police chief to say they don't have a problem, every police or law enforcement agency has problems. They don't know they have problems because if there's a complaint, you're complaining to the same organization that actually caused the infraction. I have a number of close friends of mine who are also retired military who've been stopped for no reason. And let me give you specifically, when I was elected treasurer of New Kent County in 1999. I was moving into my office in New Kent County. I was moving some stuff from my old office where I worked to my office at Colonial Downs. I parked on the side of the building. I had propped the door open and I carried 1 load of things into my office. I came back out to my car, I got another load. When I came back out into the foyer, there was a police officer there with his gun drawn, pointed at my head. And I was in a coat and tie. And he asked me, what am I doing? And I told him in some very colorful language, I told him I'm the treasurer of New Kent County. What do you think I'm doing? So for every interaction that you hear about George Floyd, there are thousands of situations that occur every day that you never hear about. I guess the reason I got involved with the coalition is because people don't understand that this has been going on not since George Floyd or not in the last 5 and 10 years. This has been going on for a long, long time. And we're just now hearing about it because everybody has a cell phone now. Before, nobody believed people when they were telling you that people were getting killed, people were getting beat up. People weren't believed until now that we have it on film. I was stationed in Thailand when the young man in California,
Rodney King.
Rodney King. I was in Thailand watching that on TV, and I just knew that these police officers were going to go to jail for that. And as time went on, we all know what happened. They were all acquitted. So it's a shame that you can serve your country. I've been to war in Iraq and Afghanistan. Never had a gun pointed at my head, but here in my own community, twice I've had a gun pointed at my head for no reason. One time I was going to basketball. I used to coach AAU basketball here in New Kent. I was taking 2 kids to basketball practice, and I saw a police officer as we were, passing a gas station. I saw a police officer over on the left. Didn't give it a second thought because I wasn't speeding. We were going to basketball practice. She pulls it. It was a state trooper who pulled us over, and when she pulled us over, I told her, I said, you need to have a real good reason for pulling us over because we weren't doing anything wrong. She said, I wanted to make sure that the person in the back seat had their seatbelt on. And at that point in time, you couldn't pull somebody over for a secondary offense like that. So, and this is after I've been treasurer for a number of years. So, So that was a situation. That was another situation with 3 black males in the car, and that's the only reason she pulled us over, because she saw 3 black males. Weren't doing anything, and see that kind of behavior needs to stop. Just pulling people over because you think they might be doing something wrong is the wrong answer. We all pay taxes. I pay taxes like everybody else. Black folks pay taxes, and we don't pay taxes to get harassed. And a civilian, every locality should have a civilian oversight board. It's just common sense, and yeah, right now Williamsburg, James City County, they have problems. They just don't know they have problems. And if we don't, when something happens, it's too late to have an oversight board. We need to have something in place right now. And I think the most important thing about a civilian oversight board is that it needs to have subpoena power and investigative authority. Because we can't trust the police to provide the information that oversight board is going to need to investigate complaints. So I just want to share some of my personal experiences. And again, I have, every friend that I have that's black, and most of my friends are fairly successful, have all experienced the same thing, and it just needs to stop. And the only reason it's coming to a head, again, the only reason it's come to a head now is because it's being videotaped. So again, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you all this evening, and I hope that the folks that listening to this tonight will support our effort for a civilian oversight board in the Williamsburg, James City County area. Thank you.
Herb Jones, thank you very much for being here and for sharing some of your experiences, which am can you all hear me?
I can now.
Can you hear me now? Sorry. I think I was just saying thank you for sharing your experiences, which although too commonplace, does not make them any less traumatizing or any less wrong. I'm going to turn now to Ms. Janet Weaver, who is with us from Williamsburg Action.
Well, hello, everybody. I am Janet Gordon Weaver. I am the media consultant for Williamsburg Action. And that connection makes me a part of the Williamsburg Coalition. I'm here this evening to tell you why I support what the coalition is doing and to share with you some experiences as to why this is important to me. I am a firm believer that we have so many issues with the criminal justice system, not just in Williamsburg, but everywhere, because of all of the rampant social injustices that we suffer. And I kind of came at this through my involvement with the schools. And the first incident I'd like to share with you is about 4 years ago, as a part of the Village Initiative, I was mentoring young girls at Berkeley Elementary School. And we had a police officer come in and talk with the young ladies and give a little presentation. And during the presentation, he showed a film. Colin Kaepernick was still kneeling at that point. He still had a job. And he was talking about gangs in the Williamsburg, James City County area. And Colin Kaepernick threw his hands up, and this police officer was insisting that it was a gang sign. I happen to know that Colin Kaepernick was a Kappa. He was a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, which is a Black fraternity. And what he actually was throwing up was just his fraternity sign. He wasn't inviting anybody to perpetrate any violence. He wasn't saying anything or giving secret signals. And I interrupted the police officer to let him know that you're absolutely wrong. What he's doing is throwing his Kappa sign up, and that's his brotherhood. This gentleman would not listen to me. He insisted that he knew what he was talking about. We eventually said goodbye, and I corrected it and made sure the girls knew what that was. I am not saying that there aren't people who try to form gangs in Williamsburg, James City County, nor am I saying that we are filled with activity. What I am saying is you have to be absolutely sure about what you're talking about when you're talking about it. Otherwise, you paint a false picture. Everyone thinks of Williamsburg, James City County as some sort of utopia, this paradise, but we're really not any different from Charlottesville. Charlottesville's statistics and demographics are almost identical to Williamsburg, except Charlottesville is a larger city. What happened when Heather Heyer was murdered could have happened in Williamsburg. Our college is not much different from UVA. Ask Mr. Jefferson, if you will. It's pretty much the same. I am a native of Williamsburg. I'm one of those rare birds. I remember the time when Williamsburg, when Highland Park, which is where my family comes from, didn't have police officers riding through the neighborhood 4 or 5 times a day. Whether they knew people or not, whether someone had called them or not, they came through the neighborhood on a regular basis. My mother and 2 of my cousins went to what is now Midtown Row. There used to be a department store there beside the Williamsburg shop called Roses. I come from a very tight-knit, very Southern family. And on Friday nights, we would gather with my grandmother and play Pacino or dominoes, anything to keep the kids out of trouble. My mom and my cousins went to the store. One cousin was in the 6th grade. The other, I believe, was in the 8th grade. They were followed around the store for a bit, and then one of the boys was accused of shoplifting. Mind you, he had nothing in his pocket. There was nothing on the ground anywhere near him. The police were called. Both of those young men were beat up. This is when they were using nightsticks or billy clubs or whatever they're called. They were beat up to the point that they had to be hospitalized. They were taken to the hospital, pictures were taken of them, and my mother about lost her mind. This was all turned over to the police and absolutely nothing happened. It was turned over to the local NAACP, and again, nothing happened. Nothing happened when it was turned over to the NAACP, because at that point, the head of the NAACP also happened to be the local magistrate. You cannot have police policing themselves. You cannot turn things over to handpicked members of our community and expect that you will actually get justice or transparency. What occurred in Elizabeth City, I'm sure nobody thought that would happen in that quaint little small town. But without transparency, nobody knows what actually occurred to Andrew Brown, who was funeralized today, and no one knows when we're going to know, except we do cameras. And prayerfully, they won't be edited to the point that we won't learn the truth. And with that, I want to say thank you for asking me to be a part of this, and we can go on.
Thank you so much for sharing. And again, thank you all for being here and contributing to this conversation. We have a number of questions that have been submitted by folks in attendance. And so I'm going to start with this question, and I think I'll just put it out for any of our panelists to jump in. So here's a question. Community advisory boards can only make recommendations. Are they the right solution when the policing system in America is as broken as it is? Can something like this actually fix our broken system?
I can jump in. This is Jessica. Actually, there was legislation passed by our General Assembly during the special session last year that gave localities the ability to give oversight boards both subpoena power as well as disciplinary power. So boards can be created to have disciplinary power now. we are sort of debating in Williamsburg, or, hopefully going to negotiate with the county officials to, our proposal was that rather than us holding disciplinary power, we would have subpoena power, we would do our review, we would make a disciplinary recommendation. And if the police chief decided to not follow our recommendation, that would be made public, and the public would know what our recommendation was and what the police chief's decision was and how they decided to move forward. So that was kind of what we put on the table, just as a way to hopefully get folks to talk with us, because the general MO is for no one to pick up the phone and them to just try to ignore the request for an oversight board. So we were our goal was to work collaboratively with these government bodies to get that set up.
If I could add to that,
Yes.
the best disinfectant for corruption is sunlight. And if you don't shine a light on it and call it out, then it's never going to change. And that's the point of the Civilian Oversight Board. It gives citizens an opportunity or a mechanism to complain or at least surface a problem. Whereas right now, if they're complaining to the police department, 9 out of 10 times nothing's going to happen. So the best disinfectant for corruption is sunlight.
Maybe as just as a follow-up, maybe could Ms. Sapollio, you were starting to talk a little bit about some of the conversations I think that you had with the local police departments. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the status of your efforts. So where does the effort to create a civilian oversight board in Williamsburg and James City County stand today? And what are the barriers? How might they be overcome?
Sure, thank you. So we put together a proposal for a civilian oversight board. Professor Gershowitz was really key in helping us with that. We spent a long time researching best practices and examples from around the country, as well as other localities in Virginia, because there are several who have put these into place and who are currently working to put them into place. So we put together a proposal to share with both locality police chiefs, and we had initial conversations that I would say were, overall, I don't know, maybe I'd characterize them as lukewarm. They were pleasant, but not a whole lot came out of them. I do think we made a little more traction on James City County side. I've gotten the sense right now with James City County, we're sort of in a holding pattern, waiting for the new police chief to be named. We expect that to come out by the end of May, and that person will start in June. In terms of Williamsburg Police Department has moved forward with what they're calling a citizen advisory committee. That is not, don't be fooled, that is not the same thing, and that is not what we're asking for. This advisory committee would be selected by the police chief. It would be a 5-member committee. It would report to the police chief, and it would not handle complaints. So they claim that they would tell them about the complaints, but they would not be at all involved in investigating. It's not an accountability body. They would just be talking about programming and things like that. So that's not, they're trying to, I would say, claim that they're addressing what we're asking for with that, but that's not the case. So what we're doing is really trying to spread the word, educate the community by doing talks like this, and really build support and get people to say that they really want this and are demanding it. Like Herb said, we're all taxpayers, and this is something that we want. We have a petition circulating that I'll put in the chat that we would love for people to sign to show support for this. We're going to be having a variety of community events. We're creating some videos to get the word out. So really, it's just getting people to show that they support this. And then we're going to be going back again. The city council members and the board of supervisors have not been responsive. We did talk to one city council member who very much said we don't have problems in Williamsburg and our police are great. So that's the general, and, my response was to that white city council member, you and I don't have problems with the police. That's not what our concern is. We know problems exist. So, so really we need people to join our coalition, sign our petition, and help put pressure on our government representatives.
And if I might just piggyback on Jessica, the story I just told you, the magistrate was the chair of the NAACP. There was no way that anything was going to move forward with that case, even though there was evidence, tangible evidence to present to them. I'd like to make it known publicly that we're not placated with just an advisory council or just a board that the chief himself handpicks, because that's not transparent. We're going to cover ourselves. We're going to take ourselves. Williamsburg Community Action Agency. The people who serve on the advisory board for the Community Action Agency are actually voted in by the communities that they serve. I don't see why that kind of thing can't take place. We don't intend to be placated. And if you want more information for anything that has to do with the coalition or what is happening in Williamsburg, just go to the Williamsburg Action Facebook page. There is always an update on everything and anything that is taking place.
Okay, thank you both. So just to be clear, the body that, or bodies that you that have to be convinced to authorize the creation of an oversight board are the city council and the board of supervisors. Is that correct?
That's right.
I just wanted it to be clear that to everyone that it because you had talked about your efforts to engage in a collaborative dialogue with the police, but that hadn't been especially fruitful. But it's not necessary to get the police to buy into this in order for it to happen.
That's exactly right. And I will say, I'm very eager to see who is appointed chief. I have talked with at least one of the candidates who was actually supportive of having a civilian oversight board. So I'm hopeful there. And we would like to be collaborative, but no, we don't need the police to give it their blessing.
Okay. All right, I'm going to read another question that was submitted in the chat. If one wants a dialogue on the topic of civilian oversight boards, who or what group would present the police department's viewpoint? Because members of some groups would like to hear both viewpoints represented.
Maybe I'll take that one, Professor Hamilton. So there are certainly police organizations that would take a position on this. There's a research organization called the Police Executive Research Foundation, and there are police unions, and of course they would all have opinions on this. To take sort of the academic or the sort of take a step back as an independent sort of look at this, my view is that I don't think that there's a really good argument against the existence of a civilian oversight board. Now, the police do have a good argument against the existence of a badly formed oversight board, right? And so very crucial to the success of an entity like this is that the people who serve on the board should know what it is that they are doing and not be put in a position in which they would be making policy for things for which they don't understand. And so police officers exercise authority based on training for what's in the criminal code, for what's in the department's policies, for the use of force that's authorized by the Fourth Amendment, for interrogations authorized by the Fifth Amendment. That's a complicated set of rules and law. And to the extent that there would be people on an oversight board who don't understand those rules and who don't sort of follow those rules and are sort of not respecting the difficulty of the job of a police officer, I think police departments would be free and fair to object to that, right? So I think crucial to an exercise like this is sort of speaking honestly on both sides. And I think an honest assessment is, I don't see a plausible argument against the existence of the organization or an entity that's an oversight board, but police could have a very legitimate objection to one that's run by folks who are not sort of in the know for looking at this. And so, as I think Jess and Herb and others have said, there would have to be training for the people on the oversight board to understand what the rules are and to get that information. I don't think anybody here, though, is saying, well, just let us in the door and we'll take care of it. That would, of course, be problematic. So, but to the extent you're looking for a contrary viewpoint, I think you would find it from a police union or from the Police Executive Research Forum would have sources that would look into that question.
Dr. Hamilton, is the question about if there's an incident and the oversight board investigates an incident, who would represent the police's viewpoint in that incident? Is that what the question is about, or is...
Well, that's interesting. It sounds like the original question was more about sort of the dialogue that we're having about the existence of civilian oversight boards. But I think that the question that you're raising is also a question that that I imagine folks who are in attendance might have, because there might be concern that that such a body would be kind of automatically prejudiced against the police officers who might be accused of some wrongdoing. Could you speak to that?
Sure. So this is why every police officer must have and be required to wear a body cam at all times. So whatever their point of view is, there's video footage and audio footage that documents exactly what happened. And just like what we saw in the trial with George Floyd, if something real serious happens, we can go step by step by step through that video on what happened. So I think that, and I don't know, Adam, you may know more about this than well, of course you know more about this than I do, but I'm not sure if it's mandated in the Code of Virginia for law enforcement officers who interact with the public to have body cams on all the time. But I think that this is another reason why body cams should be no question. If the body cam's not on, then the police officer's already wrong.
So we can take that back to Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach a couple of months ago voted not to have community oversight or an advisory board. And then you had the shootings, the number of shootings happen on the Strip, and you had the murder of Donovan Lynch. Neither of the police officers that were present had their body cams on. And as recently as 2 weeks ago, Virginia Beach City Council had another meeting where it was once voted no, we're not going to have an oversight council. During a split decision, they voted now to look into formulating an oversight council in Virginia Beach. We in Williamsburg, James City County don't need to wait until someone's been murdered or until there's some travesty that's taken place before we form said board. It should occur now. And as Herb said, you should always have your camera on or you should be fired.
All right. I think just another follow-up question to Professor Adam or Ms. Sapollio. Are police in Williamsburg and James City County required to have body cameras and to have them on? And is this, well, I guess if you all could speak to that, and then how about there's a second part to the question.
So I should know the answer to that question, and I don't know the answer to that question. I am in agreement with Herb and with Jeanette that they are good practice and good policy. They're tricky, right? In that there are privacy concerns for officers when they're going to the bathroom and they're off duty, or when there's malfunctions. There do seem to be, however, many, many instances in which magically they don't work. That would seem to be more common than the exceptions would dictate. So we should worry about that. But as a general matter, they are a very good policy. They're a cheap development that gives us access to a lot of information. I should know the answer to your question, Professor Hamilton, but I actually don't.
And I do believe that, again, I can get the specifics on this to share with folks, but I do believe that the General Assembly did, as part of a larger criminal legal system reform package, did pass legislation about body cams. So, but it may, my guess is it would go into effect in July.
Okay, thank you. All right. Here's another question that was submitted. The city of Newport News, Virginia Beach, Richmond, etc., have human rights commissions, which it seems have powers similar to those of the proposed Civilian Oversight Board. And would having a board like this give a longstanding, or I guess create a longstanding body for a variety of issues relating to violations of human rights? I guess really the question is, do we need, right? Do we need this particular body when we have this other structure in place, the human rights commissions? And I'm sorry, whoever submitted that question, if I am not getting it quite right, please correct me in the chat. Are folks familiar with the human rights commissions? Because I'm afraid that I'm not.
I'm not familiar with them, and I don't believe we have one in Williamsburg, James City County. At least I haven't heard of one.
Okay, we may have to do some research to answer that question. All right, here's another. A good deal of our community is York County. Any efforts to address that population?
Yes, we do know that there are major issues in York County. And actually, when we all got together last summer and decided what strategy we would take, we thought we would get the low-hanging fruit first with Williamsburg and James City County. And we thought once we could demonstrate success in those counties, it would give us a lot more leverage going into York. And the bottom line is, it is just an extremely slow process. So our goal is eventually to get there. Some of our other programs, like our Court Watch, was expanding into York County, and our drug court, if we're able to get that established, it will likely be a joint court between York and Williamsburg, James City County. So those will cross over, but in terms of Civilian Oversight Board, we're trying to get these two first. And just to give everyone a heads up, these are very long processes. It took Charlottesville 3 years to get their Civilian Oversight Board up and running. So we're in it for the long haul.
Thank you. Janet, were you gonna jump in?
No, not this time.
Oh, okay. I think this is a follow-up question to for Jessica. You alluded to the need to implement evidence-based policing. Can you say a bit about, can you say a little bit about what that is?
Sure. And Adam, please feel free to jump in too, because you probably have more knowledge, but there are many things. I mean, evidence-based is just, you know, when studies are done on what is effective in keeping our community safe. I mean, let's be honest, that's what we want a police force for. Our, you know, in all of our minds, a police force is to improve and public safety. And that's often, not what we end up seeing. And there's a lot of practices that don't contribute to public safety. I'll give you one example, patrolling. Patrolling is what we think of. We think of police driving around in our cars in neighborhoods, looking out for trouble. Evidence has shown that patrolling does not improve community safety. So why are we doing it? Why do we put money into it? I've talked to one of our local James City County officers, and he said exactly that. He said, I believe that we should have 1 or 2 cars out there because the community expects that of the police department, but not actually, more for visibility, not doing the policing, not doing the patrolling, because it just doesn't work. Williamsburg talks a lot about their neighborhood police officers and that they want their officers to develop relationships with the neighborhood. And that sounds really well and good. I see it as, dedicated patrolling. Why are they doing it if it doesn't work? So it's things like that. It's looking at new programs to deal with mental health issues. If you talk to our police departments, a huge portion of what they're dealing with are mental health calls and issues. Not only responding to them, but then transporting people to various treatment places, which requires 2 officers. They spend a tremendous amount of time dealing with these issues. So why do we not have a system where we have mental health, trained mental health experts responding to these? It's because they're not part of our triage system. You call 911 and there's no one trained in mental health to respond to these calls. So it's left to the officers. So we need to do, there's the whole, defund the police that you hear about, and people, it's not the best marketing, right? But what we're really talking about with defund the police is take some of those resources that the police are having to spend and put those toward building mental health response capabilities, for instance, put those toward funding civilian oversight boards, kind of restructuring things to truly make sure that what the police are doing are keeping communities safe and are not just incarcerating people unnecessarily.
If I could piggyback on that, right now, every locality in the Commonwealth of Virginia, they're putting together their budgets for the 21-22 year. And I guarantee you, every locality are asking for more law enforcement officers. There is no statistic that shows more law enforcement reduces crime. In fact, in New Kent, where I live, since I've been here, our sheriff's department has tripled in size and crime has gone up. The only way you reduce crime is to reduce poverty. More police officers are not going to reduce crime. And if you go look at your budget right now, if you go to one of the budget hearing meetings, I guarantee you, your chief of police or your sheriff is going to tell you, we need more officers to reduce crime. And they can't prove to you that more officers reduce crime. It does not. Reducing poverty reduces crime.
Professor Gershowitz, were you about to jump in?
I'll just add really briefly that the points raised, particularly about the patrolling, I think are very interesting, right? Because if we look at police shootings and police brutality, we can point to a number of cases in which those came from what is just a random run-of-the-mill traffic stop, right? And so we can question why all of these traffic stops are necessary. It is a complicated question, right? Because hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many, but tens of thousands, maybe even excess of 100,000 people, we see fatalities from automobiles, right? So speeding and reckless driving is very dangerous, and there's a need to shut that down. On the other hand, the amount of patrolling is concerning. And so when the question was about evidence-based policing, I don't know if any of the folks on this call have ever gone down Jamestown Road the way that Professor Hamilton and I do on our way to work. There's one of those flashing signs that tells you what your speed is, right? And I slow down for that sign, and I'll tell you, like, I exceed the speed limit, right? I am more likely to comply with that, and research shows people are more likely to comply with that than they are with other sort of concerns about roving patrols by police. And so the idea is there are ways to reduce, I think the idea of eliminating traffic patrolling is a counterproductive thing in the United States because of all the traffic. We're a very car-based society, right? And so eliminating that altogether is extremely problematic, but there are ways to reduce it in a way that might be actually beneficial to reducing police violence that originates from these sorts of traffic stops.
Exactly. And our police department even told me that that they are incentivized by the DMV to write tickets. So, it's these perverse incentives to, they really, it's not just money making for the police, but they get grants from the DMV for the number of people that they pull over. So, I had an officer say exactly to Professor Gershowitz's point, we need to, why are the police involved in these traffic stops? We could have a different unarmed agency working on this. It is complicated, but there are alternatives.
And I'll stop talking after this, but now I'm excited about this topic, which is to go full circle, right? After the death of Michael Brown, I think in Ferguson, Missouri, eventually the Justice Department conducted a full-scale review of the police department in Ferguson, Missouri. And what did they find? They found that the town was running on money being raised by the police department from ticketing folks, right? And so that might have been apparent to some of the people that lived in Ferguson, Missouri, but it wasn't apparent to a lot of people. And so these problems are not always apparent until you start to look. And to look correctly, you have to have an independent group that actually looks at stuff like that.
Thank you. All right, final question in our last couple of minutes before I turn things back over to Professor Allen to close things out. For folks in attendance, in addition to signing the petition, what specific actions can they take to help support this effort?
Yes, well, first of all, I invite everyone to come to our meetings. We meet on Zoom every other Wednesday. We have a meeting this coming Wednesday. You can visit our website, which is wjccjustice.org, and there's a contact form to get in touch, or I'll put my email in the chat as well. You can reach out directly to me and I can get you that Zoom information. Anybody interested in the topic is welcome. You don't have to know anything about it. Just be dedicated to it. We're going to have some upcoming events. One thing that we're planning is an event to help people with their restoration of voting rights. We're going to have the governor just restored about 60, I believe it was 68,000 people's rights, and a lot of people don't know. So we're going to run an event where people can come, print their certificate, register to vote. We're also going to then educate them about this work, have them sign our petition and get folks involved. So we've got some community events people can help with, and some other things, like I mentioned, advocating for the drug courts, et cetera. So there's a lot to do. So come to our meetings, number one. Number two, writing to city council if you're in Williamsburg, or the board of supervisors, even just a very simple email that's, I'm in support of having a civilian oversight board for the police. Please look into this. Would be incredibly helpful. But definitely sign a petition, visit our website, and come to our meetings. Fellow coalition members, do you have anything else to add to that? We're also at 5 o'clock every Sunday. We are at the WJCC courthouse, rallying and protesting for, Black Lives Matter and police accountability. So feel free to come and join us there. We're masked and distanced.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
I think Pat Evers is wanting, she's one of our coalition members. She's wanting to add something, but she keeps being muted. There we go. You're muted again, Pat. There you go.
There I go.
Sorry.
Hi, everybody. I just wanted to mention, and I wanted to give Jess an opportunity because I did send you that information about the body cams. I'll let you talk about that. But in the chat, I did put a link to the national organization. It's the National Organization for Civilian Oversight Boards. Well, I'm not saying it correctly, but the acronym is NACOL. And they do a lot of trainings on this. They've been a great source of information for us. So I would encourage everybody to look at that, but also wanted to encourage folks, if you really have an interest in this issue, you can go online and Google. There's a lot of information out about what's going on in Charlottesville and what's going on in Richmond. Charlottesville, I read today, they had a civilian oversight board, but their model is changing. And they are proposing a new model. So it would be interesting to see what their new model is. Also, Richmond formed They don't actually have the COB yet, but they formed a task force to look into forming the Civilian Oversight Board. And the task force is now meeting on Wednesdays at 6:30 on Zoom. So anyone who's interested can, go online and look at that. I think the hashtag is at RVACRB. So it would be interesting to go on and see what Richmond is doing. So I'm thinking there's just a lot of information out there about civilian oversight boards and what communities are learning. There's one in Illinois, Urbana. They started a civilian oversight board and then they've changed. So I think as the years go on, people are seeing that advisory models don't work and they need to have more teeth, which is why we really need the oversight board, not an advisory board. So, we just welcome everyone to join us and just learn as much as you can about it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to I'll turn things over to Professor Allen. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you. Having the information is so important. Being informed is so important. And I thank you for coming to help get the word out. And what regardless of what side you're on, so to speak, where your feelings are, it's very important to have the opportunity to say what what's happening and what you think can take place to fix it. And so I appreciate all of you, the panelists, taking the time to come out and share the information, and also the people listening. And so thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your evening. Bye.